Hello everyone, welcome back to Exploration Arcanum. My name is Jason, and today I'm sitting down again with Maevius Lynn, this time to talk about her new book, The Holy Year of Thelema. Thalima is a philosophy and religion rooted in the teachings of Aleister Crowley and centered on a sacred text called the Book of the Law. What Lynn has done with her book is take the holy days of Thalima, the celebrations that mark important moments in the tradition, and give practitioners something concrete to work with. We're going to talk about what those holy days are, how they compare to things like the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and the women whose contributions helped build the tradition of Thalima. I want to thank Lynn for coming on the show. I'll put links to all of her work in the description below. Let's get into it. Maevius Lynn, thank you so much for joining me again today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me back on your podcast. It is a joy, it's an honor, it's a privilege. And I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to see you flourishing with this podcast, doing good things out here. And I'm just happy to be invited back on.
Well, I can't tell you how much that means to me coming from you. I've always considered you a mentor and friend. And so I'm so happy that we can talk about your new book called The Holy Year of Thelema. So,
yes.
As you may have noticed, I've been taking notes. And this book is amazing. I have so many questions, but I guess the first question is, what led you to want to write this book?
Yeah, I think this is a great question because it really paves the way into the landscape in which this book emerged, not only for me personally, but also in the general milieu of occult and magical books out there. So I'll just first by saying, so I'm writing about Thalima, which is my tradition. For those who don't know me or seeing me for the first time, I am a ceremonial magician, an occultist, a writer, a YouTuber, an artist. Specifically, my path is Thalima. It's not confined just to Thalima, but that's the main spiritual path I do and I write about in my forthcoming book. So it's interesting because one of the first books people write when they're writing books about a spiritual tradition or something like that is the book about the holidays. And we see this just a cornucopia of books about the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, about pagan holidays. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think the reason these books come out is the fact that, all of us experience things in our own way in our own cultures of like celebrating birthdays, celebrating Christmas, or whatever your cultural context is. And so when we enter into a new religion or a new spirituality, a new philosophy, a new way to view the world, we ask, what holidays are there? What are the holy days? Because not only is it something we understand, a context to kind of get into, but it also tells you about deeper values of the belief system, for deeper morals, deeper ideas, concepts, a way to view the world. And so, it's a great question. That being said, so after that little preamble there, little ramp up, we really didn't have one. The closest thing we had to, and we certainly did not have one through a mainstream publisher, the closest thing we really had that was published was a self-published book by Dionysius Rogers where he explores the cross quarters. We did not have a book that explores the original holy days as laid out in the Book of the Law. And so my original vision for this was to just be a vision I think I accomplished, was to create a palette of ideas, of rituals, of things people could do and engage with in this tradition's holidays or holy days. And I will be using the word holy days and holidays interchangeable here, as I do in my book also. So for viewers and listeners, feel free to use whatever term you feel most resonates with you there. And the interesting thing about it, so I thought the best way to approach writing about these holidays was the original ones. So the central sacred holy text of this tradition known as Thalima is the Book of the Law. And this is the first of a large canon of holy texts that make up the backbone of this tradition. And this first central text has this list of days it calls for people to celebrate. And they are things that happen in a yearly cycle. They're things that happen through the cycle of our lives. So our lives are kind of mirroring the seasons as well, in a sense, according to me. And then we also have this secret last thing, Tahuti and the Child of the Prophets. And so those are the things from this original Book of the Law. And then over time, the tradition, modern practitioners have invented their own types of holidays, their own types of celebrations. And while the book doesn't go into all of them, because I think the celebrations out there are as numerous and many as the people on this earth. I do mention, I would say it's some of the more common ones in the last chapter. Crowleymas, is one of them, and that's Crowley's birthday. That's a little
Right.
tongue-in-cheek one people like to celebrate. There was this thing called the Holy Season that was made by Jim Eshelman for Second Order Initiates that people have since expanded upon. And then, of course, I do mention Dionysus Rogers' cross-quarter celebrations and the Gnostic Saint feast days. So those are just some examples of modern things I mention, but more importantly, is what is expanded upon the book, and that is, again, these holy days as well as these times of our lives, which, again, the Book of the Law calls for.
Well, that actually leads into a great question, because when you're introducing someone new to Thalima, after you explain what Thalima is, and you're presenting them with these holy days / holidays, which one do you think is the easiest to get a newcomer into? For like, we just did the 3 days of the Book of the Law. I posted the first chapter, New Eat.
Okay, so we're talking about the 3 days of the writing of the Book of the Law, which is an absolutely beautiful celebration of the emergence of this holy text. It's a beautiful time to return back to these 3 chapters. And I think that could be a fantastic way to introduce someone to Thelema. I love the ideas you're cooking with here, because that text is really one of the central texts, and what a great holiday to come in on. Something I think a lot about is not only how to be of service to the community, whether magical or my own Thelemic community, but a part of that service is to kind of meet people where they're at, to kind of nourish the path someone is already on. And one of the ways I like to do that is to ask, just to sort of see where that person's at, what they're interested in, what their current practice is, what they're doing. And I think if all else being equal, tabula rasa, I think, the 3 days would be a beautiful one. But, I often find people come into Thelema or are interested in Thelema from a witchcraft or pagan background, especially a Wiccan background, because these things are much more mainstream. So if someone feels that inkling, that call into practicing magic, they're most likely going to encounter Wicca, they're going to be encountering paganism. And so with that comes a lot of things they're already familiar with. For example, someone who comes from a Wiccan background, they may be familiar with the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, and which was popularized by the founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, and being like, hey, let's have a conversation. We have something very similar in Thelema. We have this cycle, but our holidays do not form equal points throughout the year. And having a conversation, say, hey, our central sacred holy text has the equinoxes and the solstices celebrated, but it does not have the cross quarters. So being like, all right, so you may, for example, according to the Wiccan Wheel of the Year, celebrate Yule. Well, in Thelema, we don't call it, as laid out by the Book of the Law and Aleister Crowley. Of course, I'm leaving room for modern practitioners to do what they will with it. But talking in terms of what Crowley talked about, it was simply called the winter solstice. And so these sort of European elements that were plugged into this Wiccan Wheel of the Year, or Wheel of the Year in general, a bit different. The meaning's a bit different. In Thelema, we have a lot of beautiful things you can connect to the winter solstice in particular, which I do in my book. But yeah, just sort of meeting people where they're at, having a conversation. So that is to say, I think perhaps witches would appreciate our celebrations of the equinoxes and solstices. But, I think the 3 days would be a great one as well. And I also really love a holiday particular to this tradition, which is the first night of the prophet and his bride, because it deals with themes of love, agape, and I think the world needs more of that. So maybe that's a good one too.
Well, I also noticed that, because you mentioned winter solstice, I noticed that the book is actually broken down in that way as well. And you include the hymn to Pan and Liber Oz, which I thought was another, like, wow, that's in here. Because it's like, you wouldn't necessarily associate that with a holiday, holy day type thing, except when you take it into the cycle of nature. Like Pan is associated with nature, and then, so the Eopan is his lyrical writing that Crowley did to, this deity. When you're looking at, though, the fact that Crowley received the Book of the Law through Rose Crowley, I guess would be the proper way to say her name at the time. What does it tell you about the contribution women played in Thelema? And how come
Well, I've actually learned quite a bit about women in Thalima through your work, and
Good,
I
good. I'm
really
glad
do
to hear that.
appreciate it. So you actually focus a lot of a section of the book on that topic. Why was that important, and how do we bring the women of Thalima more into focus in 2026?
Well, I think what you're doing is doing that. Giving opportunities and a voice. Let's first of all shout out to you, because I don't think I was the first person on your podcast, but I was one of the earliest ones, and how that really meant a lot to me. And I think it really spoke to the fact that you are willing and actively working towards making this a brighter sky with more stars in it, elevating these voices. So first and foremost, how to do it, you're doing it. But second of all, I'm really excited about kind of what you mentioned about Liber Oz and all these things in the Winter Solstice chapter. And I just want to briefly mention, before we return back to the women topic, I was told by a reader that the Winter Solstice chapter of my book was one of the best. And I don't know why that is, but I hope people enjoy it. So the interesting thing about my book is the first part of almost every chapter, not including the intro chapters, but the first part of like the second part of the book is the Crowley stuff. That's what I call it. It's the history, it's the academic look at things. And so I really asked the question of, what did Crowley say about this stuff? What was important to him? And also when there's opportunity for history, I include the history. And then once I have that Crowley stuff established, then I make a clear distinction from my own stuff. And that's where I share my own seasonal reflections, my own thoughts about that. And then you get some of my takes, my little things. And so my idea for the ritual aspect of suggestions people can do is something really simple you could do in a short amount of time, low effort, easy to do. Which is why I call them sparks of inspiration. So these are going to be journal prompts, meditations, things like that, if someone's pressed for time, they could very quickly do. And then we have altar work. So taking from my own personal practice, a little bit more effort, a little bit more challenging to do, but not a full-blown ritual. And then at the very end of the chapter, you get some of my rituals, but also members of the community. And again, I actively made sure to choose diverse members of the community and their rituals. So you're not just getting, a small subsection of the Thalima community from one organization or something like that. You get a large diversity. And I made sure to include, very intentionally, women. So you get rituals from women, you get recipes from other fellow Thalimic women in our community, poetry. I have a beautiful poem by Phyllis Seckler in the spring chapter of my book. But yeah, and I will say the group rituals are adaptable to solo people or smaller groups. But should you feel inspired by your local group or have friends who also feel equally inspired, you have that resource available to do a full group ritual, really. And I really took care to flesh out the things you need and make it as explicit as possible. So, and to kind of wrap up the winter solstice discussion. So it's interesting you said you were surprised I connected it to the winter solstice, because a Liber Oz, which is the rights of man, it's a document of liberation. It's, in other words, the Hebrew is the book of the goat. And Aleister Crowley intentionally published it on the winter solstice. So that was an intentional act on his part. And that makes sense because in Thalima, Capricorn season, the winter solstice, we connect that to the goat. And to darkness, chthonic deities like Pan. So that's part of my Crowley section. And something I've been really delighting in is hearing readers go through my book and be like, wait, I didn't know that about Crowley. And that's intentional. That is 100% intentional, because I purposely brought things into my book that are either out of print or, quite frankly, were never in print, right? So I reference Aleister Crowley's personal copy of the Book of the Law and some of the notes he has in there. So it's a cool book for people who've been around a long time to see this stuff differently and to see new stuff, not only from modern practitioners, but some new Crowley stuff as well. But also it gives people who are brand new a nice introduction and a feast of things they would not get elsewhere. So that was a long ramble, but I think we touched on a lot of cool things for people there.
Well, I mean, book has so much information that, again, it surprised me that it had this much information. Like, you have a section dedicated to what the Aeons are. You have a section dedicated to the Beast and the Scarlet Woman and Babylon. And these are not like simple topics. These are deep topics to go into. Like the whole Aeon thing by itself could be an entire episode, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why include that? Why include the Scarlet Woman in the book?
Yeah, great question. So I have sort of a two-part answer. It's why I personally included it, and then why thematically why it's there. So for me, when exploring specifically the holy day of the first night of the prophet and his bride, so that's, I first go to Crowley's commentaries on that, and it was very clear he connected that to Rose Edith Kelly, who became his sort of a surprise elopement on their journeys. And, although they married as strangers to get her out of a tough situation where her family was forcing her to marry.
Which is something else I didn't know. I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So she was, and so that's an interesting thing is sort of painting these historical women and giving them more of a voice, more of a character. And Rose was quite a firecracker. She was very much a strong, independent woman. As was the woman Crowley fell in love with and had a relationship with his whole life. He was not going after women who were fitting this stereotypical Victorian mold of being passive, demure, go with the flow kind of people. So he was specifically choosing very bold women who were bucking tradition, and Rose was one of them. So yeah, we explore sort of the wild nature of Rose and how she ran off and eloped with a stranger who was a friend of her brother's named Aleister Crowley, and despite those circumstances, she fell very deeply in love. And the thing is Rose was the first Scarlet Woman. And although the Scarlet Woman in the Book of the Law is talked about pretty explicitly, I think it's important to note that Babylon, the goddess Babylon, who is one of the most iconic, deities in Thalima, and if you don't consider them deities, spirits, archetypes, however you conceptualize it. And by the way, there's room in my book for all interpretations. I make sure to include all these perspectives in there because, again, this is a tapestry for people to fit their journey, right? Inspiration. So anyway, so Babylon, that was something Crowley later connected to the Scarlet Woman. And so that was a later development from Crowley, but again, it was Crowley, so it gets stuck into the Crowley section. And why did I personally choose to go there? And I think it's the same answer as to why I wrote this book, was I really felt that our community needed it. I think it's super easy to misinterpret the Babylon stuff because, at least, I'll put it this way. I wanted people to have a firm grasp on what Aleister Crowley said about the Scarlet Woman and Babylon and this idea of these spiritual offices existing in the new Aeon. And so that's why, sort of, in contrast, well, not really in contrast, but in harmony with that is the idea of the Beast 666, which was identified also as a spiritual office in which Aleister Crowley occupied. And then there's this complementary office of the Scarlet Woman / the earthly embodiment of Babylon that was occupied by the Scarlet Women. So yeah, it was really, I think it's, again, a subject a lot of people have covered, but I felt some of these details, especially highlighting the Scarlet Women, was missing. And I wanted it to exist in the world. And I also, as a woman, wanted to share my perspective on that and have the opportunity to dive in. And this book really is that opportunity. Yeah, it was really just rising to the needs. I felt, what did our community need? What did people need access to? And that was one of the things I felt passionate and like people needed to hear that. But yeah, it's a cool thing to talk about, especially in the context the first night of the prophet and his bride. And I also talk about things like the different types of love and fate and destiny. Those are some of my own personal ramblings I include in the chapter. But again, I've gotten feedback that they are really beautiful. And I was like, really? Because I didn't know how much of my voice people wanted in the book, but it was really people around me that were like, no, more of your voice, more of your voice. Like the Crowley history stuff is cool, but like more of you. And so, like I said, you get both, which is, it's a weird mix because people are used to only academic books and then only these like opinion pieces. And my book is kind of both.
Well, when I first started reading it, my first note to myself was how lyrical it is. And I know you're an artist and you can tell an artist wrote this because of the flow of it. It's very lyrical. It's very, this goes into this, which goes into this. It gives you that Lynn is teaching me something.
Good.
I get that as opposed to just reading. Because you should see my bookshelf. I have a lot of occult books.
Yeah.
And very few of them I actually take and want to spend time with because I feel like I'm spending time with the author. And that's what I
That's
got from reading
beautiful.
your book. So it's, again, bravo on the whole
Thank
thing.
you. Oh, that makes me so happy to hear that, because that was the goal. I didn't just want to produce a bunch of stuff and just like put it in. I mean, I wanted this book to be an experience and I wanted it to be felt. And I'm so happy to hear that that translates into someone reading it, because one of the things I really pushed for was that artistic experience of reading the book. And I also went out of my way to include lots of poetry. That was something I had to sort of fight on the back end to get in terms of permissions and just allowing my publisher to let me have poetry in the book. But I felt like from an artistic perspective, it was important. And when I sort of have my own personal reflections, yeah, I do. A lot of my personal feelings are in it, and that is not to tell people how the world is. It's just how to tell people what my human experience is and to help them have their own and see the world through my eyes and perhaps get something out of it. The purpose of art. So I love that. I love that it's coming through.
One of the areas that I thought was particularly interesting was you include a section on, is Thalima an Abrahamic religion?
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting idea to put that in there because for a lot of people, Thalima is a religion. Other people, it's a philosophy. Like I consider myself a Thelemite because I accept the book of the law and try to live by my will. But I don't go to Gnostic masses and I don't, do the traditional Thalima thing. So it's interesting to me that you put it in like, you can have different religions and still be a Thelemite. You could be a Jewish Thelemite. You could be a Christian Thelemite. You could be a Muslim Thelemite. But why was it important to say that? And what do you hope people get out of that?
Well, I do want to put in a qualifier really fast. I don't say people can be different religions. I do say, though, people from different cultural backgrounds and I say that we're all different human beings from all different families, backgrounds, cultures, communities. And with that beautiful diversity of humanness comes how our perspective of the divine unfolds, how we approach spirituality. And I truly believe that Thelema is no different. And that's pretty neat that we can all read the same holy books and it speaks to us different. And that's another thing about I make a point of in the book is that these holy books are not another dogma to live up to. They're not another type of constraint on your life telling what you can and can't do. They are instead invitations to think, to explore, to see things a little bit differently. And I love that. It's an invitation, not another dogma to hold you back. But that being said, I do, again, it was meeting the needs of the community. So there was a handful of these. I will say the whole first part of the book came about just simply by virtue of people, editors, friends being like, hey, I don't understand this. And that's one of the really valuable things about having a good editorial team, especially someone who isn't from your tradition, is they can be like, I genuinely don't understand this, or could you elaborate? And so all of that intro stuff kind of gradually, organically formed over time about what people needed. But a lot of that was just simply what I anticipated people needed from interacting with the broader magical community, spiritual communities, watching how people misinterpret things, and then reacting to that. Not in like a reactive kind of way, but in a like, hey, here's a gift, here's this, take it or leave it. Again, my whole book is just take it or leave it, but hopefully with some more insight. And one of the broader conversations happening that's very popular right now, is popular 3 years ago when I started really writing this book, and it's popular now, is this conversation around cultural appropriation or just appropriation in general. And I think the best place to start, as I have learned, with that question in conversation is first, what even is Thalima? Because a lot of people, they assume Thalima is just another polytheistic pagan offshoot. And they're just like, oh, this is just like, Reconstructionism, like is happening, around like polytheistic, Hellenic have you Norse heathenry, the whole milieu of Reconstructionist kind of polytheistic things happening. And so in their mind, it's that they start making a lot of assumptions that spiral very quickly outside of that into things that just is not reflective of the tradition or things Thelemites believe. So without getting into that too far, I wanted to first put it in the context of Abrahamic religions, because very quickly, if people like get into Thalima, so it's like you have this Egyptian stuff happening, right? But you also have this kind of almost weird Christian, a lot of Islam kind of things happening, and it's like, what's going on here? Like, this is very confusing, very weird. And so the conclusion people come to is that this is just some stuff some guy put together. And that doesn't make any sense either, especially from a Thalamic perspective. So just to be clear, Thalima is not another one of these new age, take what you want, leave the rest kind of melting pot religions either, or melting pot spiritualities. It is something that emerged like all new religious movements. I shouldn't use that term. Let me just take a break. So for additional context, I come from a very academic background. While I am a practitioner myself and I talk to other practitioners, I have a nasty habit of picking up very specific words that make sense to academics, but not to practitioners. So that's one of them that I get in trouble using, because in my mind, it makes sense in terms of this term that academics use to categorize religions, but it doesn't make sense to practitioners. So the term I will instead use, I'll just say the emergence of spiritual evolution of various religions or philosophies or systems of mysticism, and or for the people who are like, it's both of these for me, plug and play. If you don't like a word I'm using, plug in the one that means something to you. But anyway, similar to like other religions, they have holy books. Thalima does too. And these are channeled works that come from the words of the divine. Now, again, Thelemites are interesting because they're so diverse, and what the divine means to them is very different. So for them, it is gods plural. For them, it is a god, a singular god. For them, it is, emanations of spirits. For them they take a more atheistic approach than just simply outpourings of the subconscious, right? Or outpourings of some universal truth. So whatever that means to you, when I say the divine, whatever that means. But that's what's going on there. It wasn't someone consciously sitting down and collecting these things. It was the outpouring, the flowing through you of holy text, and specifically the Book of the Law that kicked it off.
Right. Because even in 1902, when the Book of the Law was received, and I say received because that's the story. That's
exactly. Crowley talks about they went to Cairo, Egypt on their honeymoon. So they eloped and eventually went on this honeymoon, and they were in the base of one of the pyramids, and Crowley wanted to impress Rose. And the way he wanted to impress Rose, even though she was not an occultist, she wasn't interested in this magic stuff at all, but he sort of fell on his Golden Dawn background, which, by the way, Aleister Crowley was not a member of the Golden Dawn at the time. This was something in his past at the time, and Aleister Crowley was actually a Buddhist when he was doing this. But he's like, all right, time to do some magic to impress her, and he tries to invoke air spirits known as sylphs. So he does this operation, nothing happens, he's disappointed. However, from this, for whatever reason, Rose starts to sense a presence. She says, there's an entity or spirit talking to me named Horus, and Horus wants you to do this ritual. And Rose actually wrote out some instructions or gave them to Crowley, and then Crowley took those instructions and fleshed them out. But before he had to flesh out those instructions that he got from Rose to do this ritual to invoke Horus, he had to test her, because every good magician knows a spirit shows up, you better know what that spirit is. And so he started testing her to be like, all right, who is Horus? So he asked her a bunch of questions. She was able to answer all of them correctly. And then a huge culmination of this was they actually went to the museum. And he's like, okay, point out what you're experiencing, who you're talking to. And she goes up to an exhibit with a stele in it, number 666, which is a number that has a lot of solar meaning in Thalima, so that made sense to Crowley. And she correctly identifies which one is Horus. And then it turns out the whole picture on this, what we refer to as the Stele of Revealing, is actually what would eventually come from the Book of the Law, which did not exist yet. So we're getting to the point where the Book of the Law exists. So Crowley is finally like, okay, Rose, I believe you. So he took Rose's ideas for this ritual to invoke Horus. He writes something called the Supreme Ritual, which they perform on the spring equinox, 1904. And what's really interesting about this is, it happens And from these instructions he gets from this supreme ritual, he finds out a lot of stuff. First, he is called to do another operation over the course of 3 days at noon. And this operation, you got the information from this one, would eventually become the Book of the Law. But while we're at the Supreme Ritual, fun fact, since they originally performed it on the spring, that's the Stella revealing. So while they originally performed it on the spring equinox, that's something you can do as well. And that's kind of a cool thing to do, is to kind of remake these old rituals. And then in my book, not only do I reproduce the original ritual, and I took care to include the original formatting. That was a bit of a fight, you know how formatting is. But I also took care to write a nice little introduction to the ritual, tell people what they need, and a more gentle on-ramp. So for people who actually want to perform this ritual, they can much more easily with the information in my book. Anyway, so they do the Supreme Ritual, and then eventually when it comes out, it's Book of the Law time. Aleister Crowley goes into a room by himself at noon and outpours a chapter. And he does this over 3 days, producing the 3 chapters of the Book of the Law.
And that is in the voice of Nuit, Hadith, and Rahor.
Absolutely.
And every time I talk to you, I learn something.
Good. Yeah, and I leave room in my book about what those mean to an individual. And I truly believe the most fulfilling spiritual path is one that you embark on your own. It's one you arrive at your conclusions through your own reflection, your own hard work. And I truly believe that people can arrive at the correct spiritual truths just by virtue of stepping foot on the path and persevering. So I also hold very sacred and true these mysteries. So whether they're mysteries I think exist on the great work, also mysteries in our initiations, whether it be OTO or other organizations, it was just so important to me to not put in spoilers. However, for those who know, there's lots of nods throughout my book. There's some great information there. But again, there's no reason to join a group to embark on this beautiful spiritual path. But if you do, there's little hints and fun stuff in my book. They're like, oh yeah, haha, that's nice. But yeah, again, I just wanted this to make people's path more beautiful, more meaningful, to get the most out of it. And I took care to do that in a way that's respectful to all people, regardless of where they are in their path.
Well, again, this is an amazing book, and congratulations on it.
Thank you.
Guys, the reason why I share Lynn's work so much is because she is one of the real ones as far as teachers and
Thank you.
people. I can't. I mean, I'm nerding out, sure, but it's true. And we spent a lot of time on the internet. We hear a lot of voices, and it's rare to hear a voice of someone who actually cares about what it is they're talking about. And you're one of those people. So
thank you so much.
It does mean a lot to me that you come on the show, because it is like, I can't believe I'm talking to Lynn again, you know.
It means a lot to me to be here. You're doing amazing stuff on this program, truly.
Well, I do appreciate it. Okay, so for people who want to follow your work and learn more, where do they go?
All right. So you can find me on all the usual social medias, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. Those are the places I'm most active. I also have a YouTube channel, Maevius Lynn. And I also have a personal website, MaeviusLynn.com. That's a new development. And so what's nice about my personal website is I put a lot of resources, handouts you can download, but also get information about me. If you are interested in perhaps getting a little bit of extra community as well in your learning, I do run an online book club through my Patreon. So people can join there. My Patreon's Maevius Lynn as well. And I should also, what else should I plug? Oh, I'm currently on a book tour. So if you want to meet me and buy a copy in person, as well as get my signature, all that good stuff, hear me talk about it, go check out me on book tour. There's a bunch of things happening. I don't know when you're listening or seeing this, dear viewer, but I have my book tour schedule on my website as well as on social media, so you can very quickly find it. And yeah, come join me at an event.
Well, we'll put all of that in the description below. Lynn, thank you so much for taking the time. I really
Thank you so
it.
much. This has been a joy and a pleasure, and I hope people enjoy my book.
Casting circles, beat them